Okay, welcome everybody to our Crow Canyon webinar for the day. We're going to have a talk today from our field archaeologist, Tim Wilcox. I will introduce him in a minute, but first let's do all of the mechanics of the webinar. So first of all, as always, I want to thank Dylan Schwint and Taylor Hasbrook, who are making this all possible behind the scenes. And I also want to acknowledge some of our funders. Crow Canyon is grateful to the Colorado Humanities and the National Endowment for Humanities for their CARES Act support last year. These grants helped us maintain operations and create new programming like this webinar series. I should introduce myself. My name is Michelle Turner. I'm a postdoctoral scholar at Crow Canyon. For those of you who are not real familiar with Zoom yet, a few things about the experience. You can move our heads. If you see our heads floating in the way and we're blocking your view, you can just click on the box and drag it out of the way. We have a new feature on Zoom. You can get a live transcript or closed captioning as Tim is talking. It's down in the bar at the bottom of your screen, and you can click on live transcript to turn it on or off if it's getting in your way. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. It's a little hard for us to monitor both the chat and Q&A boxes, so put it in the Q&A. We'll try to get to all of your questions, but we're going to hold them till the end after Tim is talking, unless there's like a clarification question. I might interrupt Tim. If you're having any difficulties with the Zoom, you can always head over to our live stream on Facebook. It's crowcanyon.org/Facebook. And you can also subscribe to us on YouTube. That's the address. And you can subscribe, you can like our videos, and this video will probably be posted probably later this evening, and all of our webinars are up there. For those of you who might not be familiar with Crow Canyon, our mission is to empower present and future generations by making the human past accessible and relevant through archaeological research, experiential education, and American Indian knowledge. And you can learn more at our website or watching these webinars. Crow Canyon also acknowledges the Pueblo, Ute, Diné, Jicarilla, Apache, and Paiute people on whose traditional homelands we work and reside. We are grateful to all Indigenous people who continue to preserve and protect cultural traditions, maintain ancestral relationships, and steward these lands. The work we do here would not be possible without recognizing and honoring the many generations of people that we learn from every day. Upcoming webinars, we have this exciting series with Craig Childs next week and the week after, so February 25th and March 4th. It's going to be a special mini-series, very exciting. Hope people can join us for that. And we also want to acknowledge that this is a really hard time for everybody, and especially for Native American groups. We have a list here of places where you can donate if you would like to. I won't go through all of that, but if you want to find this information after the webinar, it'll be in the YouTube video, so you can come back to it. Places where you can donate to make a difference in these hard times. All right, so I would like to introduce our speaker, Tim Wilcox, my friend and colleague here at Crow Canyon. He is a field archaeologist here at Crow Canyon. He's also a PhD candidate at Stanford University in the anthropology department. And I believe he is presenting at least some of his dissertation research today. Tim is a member of the Navajo Nation and Oke-Awinge. His doctoral research focuses on technological style and communities of practice for Gobernador Polychrome pottery, which we'll be talking about today. Tim is also a potter himself, and as a traditional Navajo and Tewa potter, he brings an indigenous perspective on the technological style and communities of practice involved in pottery. Tim has worked for the Navajo Nation Archaeology Department, Stanford Heritage Services, Desert Archaeology, and now, of course, Crow Canyon. And I also want to mention this talk is sponsored both by Crow Canyon and by the Eastern Chapter of the Colorado Archaeological Society. All right, Tim, I will stop sharing and let you take over.
Hello, everybody. Tim Wilcox initiate Toro Chitney Nisle do kintlechitni kis anigi bashichin, do nas ani, second fox loriegi dashiche, tabaha dashinale, basinil da nasha. What I just said is my name is Tim Wilcox. I'm Bitterwater Clan, born for Red House Clan, a Navajo clan that derives from Eastern Pueblo. My maternal grandfather is Second Fox from the Great Lakes, Midwest area, and my paternal grandfather is Edgewater Clan, and I'm from Winslow, Arizona. Today I will be presenting on my dissertation. Let me start my screen share. Today I will be presenting my dissertation research on Gobernador Polychrome pottery, the first painted and polychrome pottery produced by Navajo people in the Deneta region of northwest New Mexico around Navajo Reservoir between 1630 AD and 1775 AD. My research collection is the Dorothy Kerr collection, curated at the Museum of Northern Arizona, and was excavated in 1939. Her Deneta work was only published in a short article with her dissertation work focusing on Big Bead Mesa on the eastern flanks of the San Mateo Mountains, more commonly known as Mount Taylor, near Grants, New Mexico. I chose an existing collection as an indigenous archaeology method to avoid further desecration of Navajo sites. My research sites encompass a fair amount of the Deneta area, and you can see here, I should have had a more general map, but Navajo Lake is just right off the map here. And this is Gobernador Wash, Francis Wash, Lahara, yeah. And over here is Largo Canyon. So this is, Gobernador Wash is sort of considered the central area of Deneta, and you can see that most of my sites are within this central area of the Gobernador Wash. There's a couple on Francis Mesa and some on the wash coming out of Lahara Canyon. And then there's some outliers. One's in Munoz Canyon and Jaramillo Canyon's like way south, almost. It's almost on Jicarilla land because the Jicarilla reservation jogs this way. And Manzanares Canyon site is almost near Blanco, New Mexico on the west. But because of the historic nature of Dorothy Kerr's excavations, her notes are very sparse, and that parallels Carlson's 1965 write-up of Earl Morris's excavation notes decades after the fact. But there are 1,304 Gobernador sherds in the collection, and those provide much data for me to look at. My early questions about social relationships reflected in distribution of painted design styles and other aspects of the ceramic technology were limited by hurdles of like trying to corroborate 3 different site numbers. Since this was at M&A, there's an NA site number, which is Northern Arizona, and this is in New Mexico. There's also an LA number, which is New Mexico's way of recording archaeological sites, and Dorothy Kerr's own numbering method. And those are sort of, some of them I'm still not exactly sure exactly where they are. And these are more like the way we think of sites today. a lot of Dorothy Kerr sites were actually loci within these different sites. So, some of those loci are some of the ones that are really difficult to find. But these show the main, the general area where the collection comes from. So I found that because of the sparse notes that a detailed examination of the technological choices and firing regimes was the best way for me to look at this collection. Okay. And just for a moment, I want to return to the Navajo introduction. This introduction recites the maternal lines or clans of your mother, father, maternal grandfather, and finally your paternal grandfather. It is a way to learn social relationships necessary for semi-sedentary agro-pastoralists sparsely occupying a huge area of the Four Corners region. In this system, you can be related to someone you have never met or that lives on the opposite side of the Navajo Nation, or you can have a grandfather that is 20 years younger than you. As you can see by my introduction, you can also have non-Navajo relatives that were traditionally incorporated into our clan system. Zuni Edgewater, Tobacco, Tewa Bear People, Red House, Coyote Pass, and Hairy People or the Weavers were all Pueblo derived. I detailed this because it shows the importance of ke or family regarding the social interactions we may infer from archaeological evidence and at a bigger scale, some theoretical foundations of my research. My interest in Gobernador pottery was sparked by the recognitions of its resemblance to early Tewa polychrome jars. As a Tewa and Navajo potter, the resemblance of the spare tire shoulder bulge and certain design motifs were obvious to me, so I pursued it as my dissertation topic. I found that there are very few examples of Gobernador jars, and more of the well-known ones really exhibit the spare tire shape, but not all the jars represent that. But I found that the bowls are very well represented, and they also show the early historic Tewa carinated or keeled bowl forms. And in relation to that, to those familiar relationships, that concept is scalar and it goes on to other things like your relationship with, the land, animals. Even I watched this really cool webinar the other week on Navajo astronomy and our relations with the sky, and another scholar that talks about this is Gregory Cajete in his Native Science, a science of interrelationships. So I think that way of thinking about how all this is all related, and I hope to demonstrate that in my presentation today. As a potter proficient in many styles, including Hopi Tewa, this is one of my Hopi style pots, Rio Grande Tewa, Navajo, and Southwestern organic black and white pottery replication, I'm uniquely qualified to tackle these questions. I first learned to make pottery from the Pulheco family in Winslow, Arizona. They were Hopi Tewa, and living far away from my Rio Grande Tewa roots, this was the best my parents could do for my interest in pottery. The interest was always there, and when I had trouble with my paint adhering, I would get pointers whenever I could. One humorous time was with my aunt's mother at Titomovi, Susie Avella, and she was sort of giving me a lesson on mixing the paint while she was covered in mud from a Hopi wedding mud fight. I quickly took what I learned and began to experiment with what was going on in the contemporary Rio Grande Tewa pottery world. With red slip, I could make Santa Clara style sgraffito pottery, I could also make Tewa blackware pottery because the firing regime did not make the color of the clay important. My grandmother, Dorothy Wilcox, also gave me polishing tips that she learned growing up in Okeawinge, or San Juan Pueblo. I continued to make these styles until I was in college. It was there while working for NAD that I began to learn about the ceramic technology of the Kayenta ancestral Puebloans and their organically painted black and white pottery. Dr. Kelly Hayes Gilpin gave me information about what she knew and told me about Paul Ermigiati's kiln conference here at Crow Canyon Archaeological Center. I learned there that Mesa Verdeans shared this organic paint technology, and I began to make organic painted pottery replications that required a firing regime that was unknown to me until I attended the Crow Canyon Kiln Conference. The physics and chemistry behind this firing regime really influenced my way of thinking about ceramic technology across space and time. The very heavy fuel load and time-intensive organic paint firing regime, in addition to having access to sheep dung at this point in my life, started my Navajo pottery phase. So here's a Black Mesa black and white that I made, and this picture up here is one of the firing, the smothering style that I learned at the Crow Canyon Kiln Conference. And these are some of my Navajo pots. I had the knowledge to form and fire these Navajo pots, but was given pointers by my wife's grandmother, Lily Red Steer, on coating them with pine pitch. Most native elders don't give you the whole, they give you pointers, but they let you learn by trial and error until you get it right. You know, every now and then they may point you in some direction, but they never like really show you everything. When I returned to grad school, my advisor, Dr. Judith Habik Moshe, her work on the technological style of glaze wares extended my interest in ceramic technology through space and time. My summer research in grad school gave me access to museum collections, time with my family in Okeawinge to ask about pottery production and clay sources within my Tewa family. And I was finally able to make some Tewa polychrome pottery using Tewa clays and using the historic Tewa or prehistoric and protohistoric Tewa organic painting style by taking the knowledge I got from replicating ancestral Puebloan black and white pottery. So these are some of my black and white replications. This is a black and white replication, even though it's Cibolan, it's supposed to be mineral, but it's organic. It still looks pretty cool, I think. This was one of my Mesa Verdean replications. These other ones, I think, are just mainly like Sosi style from the Kayenta ancestral Puebloans. And throughout learning, like I'm always learning, you're never finished learning this stuff. And I found a person that had another firing regime that was slightly different than what I learned at the Crow Canyon Kiln Conference. Yet you achieve the same results, and in my opinion, I think they're actually a little better because the paste is harder. So you know, who knows? There's a bunch of different ways to achieve the same look, and that's one of the reasons why like technological style and communities of practice is important, because just because it looks the same, there are other clues that may tell you that, oh, they're not the same because of this step in creating those pottery. So Oh, here's just some other pics. Mesa Verde and slab line kiln, Flagstaff bowl, and these are some table forms. The carination on these bowls is really exaggerated, but I don't know. I thought it looked cool. So I told you that I was able to finally make the Tewa polychromes, and these are examples of that. And I think it shows how this journey was full of interrelationships, including familiar relationships that came full circle and brought me back to my original goal of making pottery that represented my identity. You can see how the relationships within are more than just familial. The production of Navajo Gobernador Polychrome in the 17th century is a significant deviation from a well-established Navajo gray ware pottery technology that has been called a woodland style with pointed or round bottoms. Most are thin and heavily tempered with sand and mica, and they exhibit corncob or dry grass scraping marks, and they are dark gray cooking vessels. Some Apachean grayware vessels can be quite large. And this on this side, it's not just Navajo. They also show different Apachean styles. And this is one of the I guess confounders in all this is that these grayware vessels resemble other Apachean pottery as well as Guyana, Ute, and Taos pottery. So the cultural affiliation is not obvious unless they're in a context that makes it obvious. Deneta grayware. Oh, and this is look at this Apachean pot. Look how big it is. It's probably like 2.5 to 3 feet tall if it was upright, but with the pointed base, it can't be. And these are very recent replications, Crow Canyon replications for our teaching collection of Navajo grayware that me and Paul Ermaggiati made. And with all my experience, I never really had to make graywares, and Paul would ask me, "What do we do?" I'm like, "I don't know. I've never done this." So, but I think we made pretty good. We accomplished the feat pretty good. They came out nice and gray. We had to add organic material at the end, sort of like raku style. And since it was fall, I was just throwing a bunch of cottonwood leaves on it. So we got the gray color that we were trying to achieve. Deneta grayware's first culturally Navajo occurrence was found in the context of a fork stick hogan site that was tree ring dated to 1541. We can assume that this cultural signature was developed before this date, but has not preserved well enough to be seen as an archaeological signature. Common Puebloan trade wares during the time of Navajo grayware production or Deneta grayware production included Jemez black and whites, Tewa polychromes, glaze E, glaze F, Acoma Zuni polychromes, and Hopi yellowware pottery. And all these support prehistoric and protohistoric Navajo and Puebloan interactions. I think I missed the slide. Yeah, so I was talking about, I've been mentioning Deneta a lot when I talk, and this is the conceptual Navajo world on a real map. So we have 4 sacred mountains that surround what we consider, you can also call this Deneta because it's sort of scalar, but archaeologically, Deneta is this sort of brown shaded area south of the San Juan River in northwest New Mexico. And it's like the center of, I mean, it's not an exact, this is conceptualized as like a east, south, west, north, but it's more sort of stretched out this way. But in our heads, that's the way we think of it. And so the sacred mountains are Blanca Peak by Alamosa, Mount Taylor by Grants, New Mexico, San Francisco Peaks by Flagstaff, and Mount Hesperus right up there by Crow Canyon. And so then there's also two other very important geological or mountains, I guess, Herfueno Mesa and Gobernador Knob. And most of my research sites are like right in here. So, and here's when I talked about the gray ware, the first Navajo gray ware and its association. Here's a Fort Stick Hogan. That was one of the first, culturally recognized Navajo dwelling. And then there's also pueblitos in the area, but these are later from the 18th century. But the Fort Stick Hogan was like I said, there was one dated to 1541. Here's another pueblito. So Gobernador Polychrome is the first painted pottery produced by Navajo people, but was originally attributed to Puebloan refugees during the Revolt era. Gobernador Polychrome has a limited range. Its occurrence in Deneta, the conceptual as well as geographic center of the Navajo world, designates it as an important part of Navajo traditional history. It has since been shown archaeologically to be Navajo produced and have an earlier inception date of around 1630 and was produced through 1775. Because of this, Reed and Reed called for further studies focused on its relevance to Navajo social life and not Western thought. This shift in technological style likely has its origin in Eastern Pueblo styles, specifically Tewa spare tire jar forms, as well as Rio Grande glazeware, Puname, and Tewa traditions of carinated or keeled bowls. Among the attributes of Gobernador Polychromes are Tewa and other Rio Grande design layouts executed in a matte mineral paint on a yellow colored paste that usually has a gray high fired core. This yellow to buff body clay with black and red mineral paint is similar to Hopi yellow wares, and the vitrified paste is interpreted as resulting from high firing temperature, another attribute of the coal-fired Hopi yellow wares. Yet this vitrification is not produced by the Hopi firing technology and seems to be unlike any other in southwestern ceramics. This technological attribute leads me to conclude that the firing regime was not formally taught to Navajo people by Puebloan potters, but that it is a uniquely Navajo practice. The surface treatment of corncob scraping prior to polishing is another distinctly Navajo and Apachean practice. Yet, the importance of this ceramic style during the Revolt era cannot be emphasized enough, as these forms appear as far west as Awadavi and Paiutki among the Hopi Mesas in northeast Arizona. This Eastern Pueblo influence supports a widespread Revolt era material phenomena that is worth further investigation. So here's so those were whole pots. Oh, I should have. Can I go back? How do you go back? I forgot to add my captions. The 3 color examples of whole pots on the left are from SARS Indian Arts Research Center, and I was supposed to put I forgot to put the captions with the photo credit. But if you want to know, you can get a hold of me somehow. This other one is, I think, in Brugge's, or is it Carlson's publication? Or I think it might be both. But this is the most well-known example of Gobernador Polychrome, and I think it's up at the UC Boulder in their collection. And so those are very beautiful, but this is what I work with, and even this is a selection of some of the best examples. My collection was all sherds. There were no whole pots, and there were very, very few jars, and it was mostly bowls. And a lot of the sherds are the bases, which are just red. So this is what I work with, and you can see how just below the rim is either flat or it could be sort of concave. That's that sort of mimics the carination or the keeled Tewa style. Okay, I tried to take out all of my animations, but they're still there. Some of them. So here's two examples of Tewa polychrome carinated bowls, and two other jar examples of the spare tire form, which developed from the Sankawi black on creams into the Tewa polychromes. The crossing of social boundaries between Puebloan and non-Puebloan social groups has archaeological implications that are affected by constructed narratives. Most Apachean archaeology, Navajo included, has been interpreted from a Western academic point of view that interprets their presence as a wandering immigration from the north. Using a communities of practice and technological style framework enables me to interpret ceramic technology in a way that can elucidate social interactions of learning. I chose to interpret this brief emulation of Puebloan technology as part of a well-established Navajo and Puebloan terrain of complex social interactions, especially during the Spanish colonial period in northern New Mexico. These context situations, as well as the amalgamation of diverse social groups, have been shown to produce new forms of material culture and are considered part of the reformulation of social relationships and identities. In fact, Navajo oral traditions emphasize such a situation in Dineta, which not surprisingly means among the people, with the root words of Dine meaning the people and Beta meaning among. The adoption of outside groups is kept within Navajo social memory by diverse clan origin stories, and by descriptive clan names. Clans are known to have originated from Jemez, Zia, Okeowinge, Zuni, and the Hopi Pueblos. Others originated from Ute, Apache, and Spanish, and possibly even Tlaxcalan Mexican native soldiers from Spanish entradas may be included in the Nakai Dene, or the Mexican clan of the Navajos. I might skip a couple paragraphs because of the time. So here's some of the history of the forms right in that just prehistoric or before contact, moving into contact, how development of bowl rim forms through the glaze. These are the glazeware rims, and it ends with this like sort of straight, or they can be sort of incurved, keeled rim forms, and the bulging how the bulging tall jars evolved out of the more squat glazed jar forms. And here's also glaze, some more glaze bowl forms. And then this is another slide of Deneta. I think we could just skip that because I'm going to move on to I already talked about these clan origins, so this shows a map of these are known, like we have clans and their origin stories, you know, say they came from here. And those clan stories can be different than our main narrative of Navajo history. By adopting clans, those people can have other histories that are their own. So in my research and concentrating on technological styles, I concentrated on surface treatment and firing regimes to evaluate or to compare with Revolt era Puebloan ceramics. Corncob scraping is a common surface treatment in Deneta graywares that predate Gobernador by at least 140 years. Very pronounced parallel striations are easily visible to the naked eye. Around 10% of the collection was corncob scraped. However, if you look at the numbers by vessel part, the percentage jumps to 18% for shoulder sherds and 26% for rim sherds. So those aren't really high percentages, but that's not to say that, I mean, they did polish after they corncob scraped them, so they could have been obliterated. And there's also a trend to neglect finishing the bases with any treatment, including slipping, polishing, or smoothing on Gobernador Polychromes. Like the basal red slip will just sort of be nicely put on right at the shoulder, but it may like sort of get less thick, or it may even disappear down close to the base. And also the same with the polishing. The rim and just past the shoulder may be polished very well, but the base may not. And no sherds from this time period, no Puebloan sherds exhibit corncob scraping. And if they did use corncobs, they usually obliterate the striations to achieve a smooth surface. I think I mentioned this later, but yeah, I do. The grayware also have an applique clay band, and it's thought of as a necklace decorating the pot, and I'll touch on that later. So additionally, the firing technology is like no other in the Southwest. Pastes are uncharacteristically vitrified, sometimes bloated and warped. I did some incremental firing of clay samples up to 1100 degrees centigrade, and it confirmed that all but alluvial clays from the wash beds that are similar to Gobernador Polychrome paste could withstand high temperature firing. So that left the firing regime as the possible factor in this vitrification. Reduction firing has been shown to lower sintering and thus vitrification temperatures by 100 degrees centigrade. And I have vitrified and warped pots firing organic painted black on whites at 1100 degrees centigrade. And my study of Gobernador sherd cross section shows that the most common cross sections are reduced. So let me, you can see how the middle of the sherd, it like almost looks like a cinder, and it's very dark gray. And then there's a pretty stark yellow rind. And this sherd, you can see warping and bloating. These are actually bubbles that are forming in the paste. So this slide shows only the 8 most common types of cross sections, but I recorded 25 because I really wanted to get at the nuances of these firing regimes. As the oxidation rinds, of course, are affected by both the porosity of the clay and the atmosphere, the firing atmosphere, how much oxygen is available. So you can see that these are some of the most common ones I found. And here's a frequency cross-section of the firing regimes. And these numbers corroborate with the numbers on the bottom right here. Out of these 25, only 5 are fully oxidized, while 20 others have some form of reduction. Another common attribute is spalling at 40%. I noticed that unlike other spalls I have seen, these were not oxidized. In my experience, pottery spalls are usually formed from rapid temperature rise early in the firing process, and thus the spall surface is subsequently oxidized. Another possible explanation is that calcium-rich inclusions either spall during firing or absorb moisture post-firing and expand to create a spall. A small white dot is visible when calcium-rich minerals form the spall. Both these attributes are absent on Gobernador Polychrome spalls. Gobernador spalls are clustered and penetrate the oxidation rind into the dark gray paste, which remains unoxidized. Vitrified paste and bloating exhibit positive associations with spalling and sharp oxidation rinds, which leads me to hypothesize that Gobernador firing regimes may include a reducing atmosphere similar to organic painted black and white firing that produces initial vitrification and gray to dark gray paste, and then at some point the pots are oxidized, possibly by reheating or continuing the firing for greater length. The vitrification forms a barrier that does not allow the release of gases or has a different expansion rate that results in a spall. This hypothesis is also supported by the fact that the paste group with the most spalls is a homogeneous, fine-grained, silty paste that forms a glassy paste when vitrified. Firing regimes with 2 temperature spikes is unheard of among the Pueblos. These 2 technological choices show a marked difference from Puebloan ceramic technology. Oh. I'm gonna skip this slide. This slide further shows the proliferation of the Tewa jar forms, and I mean they don't all exactly have the spare tire. So this is Tewa's over here. This is a Glaze F, Coiti Glaze F. Here's the Gobernador Polychrome. This is a San Bernardo from Owatavi, and this is a Paiute pottery. These are all at MIAC in Santa Fe. So those illustrate that spread, and to a lesser extent, I think they're not exactly these tall, shouldered jar shapes, but the bulge, that Pookie bulge or the spare tire, appears at Zuni and Nakama too, except the top tall shoulder is different. At Zuni, the bulge is in the center, and at Acoma, above the bulge is sort of dome-shaped. So that's interesting that at that time, this Puki bulge spread across the Pueblo world. So I've been talking about using some indigenous archaeology methods, and one of those is the use of oral traditions, and that many times the use of oral traditions invokes judgment of nonsense from scholars, and the root of that issue lies in who has the power to impose truth on their own perspective. Native studies, this discussion sort of comes from, I've talked about in other talks, I'll tell you where they are if you want to see them, about native studies from native concepts that were sort of some indigenous archaeologists are trying to use in archaeology. So native studies uses methods to rhetorically analyze and use these oral traditions to produce novel research questions. Craig Howe points out that tribal histories are not linear like Euro-American history. Tribal histories are contextual and contingent based on landscapes, words, names, or songs. The narrator controls the narrative, not an abstract notion of time. While contextual in performance, the Navajo tradition conceptualizes a basic chronology set forth in the main stock narrative of the Joje, or blessing ware ceremony. Kelly and Francis's work on the Fruitland Project provides a method to decode Navajo oral stories and even speak of its usefulness in developing testable archaeological research questions. Warburton and Begay also give an example of using oral traditions to understand temporality of social interactions and relationships formed by those interactions. There are well-known Dene clans that originate from the Pueblos, as I've mentioned many times, while Dene oral traditions do not attach dates to these events. We know from historical documents that Pueblo people fled to Deneta before, during, and after the Revolt era. Another use of native paradigms is looking at ideology, and that directly bears on my research, I think. And this is partly, our ideology is based on this native science, that this corpus of knowledge that we've built up over centuries and living in this area, and so and living in the world. So many native paradigms acknowledge an animate, living, and conscious cosmos. The same is true in Dene thought. The earth is our mother, the sky is our father. The earth as our mother metaphorically gave birth to us during the emergence. A concrete example of this metaphor can be seen in moisture from the sky that produces life on the earth, most evident on the mountains where earth and sky meet. So you can see this has like Mother Earth, the previous worlds, the place of emergence, and then our Father, the sky, is above it. And this model talks about, shows like the earth as our mother, then the sky, and how there's a motion from like rain falls down to the earth, then plants grow up and mature. So it's sort of like another cyclical thing. So that's some of our more simple aspects of how we think of the world. Okay, and so speaking of mountains, the sacred geography of the Dene world, as I mentioned before, is bounded by 4 sacred mountains. The spiritual protection of these mountains provide is synonymous with the 4 main posts and protection of a Navajo home a Hogan provides. These mountains are also thought of as pillars that hold up the sky. In fact, there are many bowls in my research collection that have wide red vertical lines outlined in black on the collars and may represent these pillars. If we accept that the earth is our mother and the clay is earth, we begin to see relationships that may structure practices. In Tewa ethnography, there is clay woman. In Navajo ethnography, there is old pot woman. This metaphoric relationship also supported by the Navajo view that the applique band at the top of the Navajo gray ware pottery is thought of as a necklace adorning the female pot. So one interesting thing, like if you think of that ideology in the four mountains, there should be, four pillars. Many times there's more than one pillar in an area. There might be two or three. But interestingly, they're usually divided, the pot's not divided into four, it's divided into five. But that also sort of corroborates with fork stick hogans, because we conceptually think of them as having four each direction. But you have a doorway to the east, and you can't have a post in the middle of a doorway, so you actually have two eastern posts. And that's sort of, provides that opening, like on a Navajo basket, when you begin in the east and the cycles go clockwise and return to the east. So that's another interesting relationship between these pots that are divided into five sets of pillars. And so I would like, a lot of this talk is, it's very structuralist, and I don't know. People sometimes have their, that's an older concept in anthropology, but I think that as Native people, we actually sort of think that way. I just explained all that, how we think of our world. And I think, well, because he's from my village, Alfonso Ortiz's Tewa ethnography lays out the medicine bowl as a representation of the world, which parallels Navajo thought also, especially the center emergence place. And I think that's exhibited in some sand paintings, where the place of emergence is actually a pottery bowl that's sort of buried in the sand. There's other stories where they use a bowl in the river and they swirl it around, and that it opens a portal to the watery underworld. So those sort of support that same thought, that these bowls represent the earth, and of course the center is the place of emergence. So I've sort of like looked at these jars, and as a Native person and living here in the Southwest and seeing these pots, and thinking about them in this manner, it's just my thought. It's like, it's a phenomenological thought that I have, is that these pots actually look like thunderstorms that are headed towards you, that are like, because when you look at them, they're symmetrical. A thunderstorm leans in the direction of the wind, so if you looked at it from the side, it would be leaning, it wouldn't be symmetrical. But if you had a thunderstorm that was coming right towards you, that was going to bring you your fields, the landscape, moisture that produces food for you, it would be a pretty significant thing. So I think the ideological significance of these jar forms are just as important as bowls, and it may explain their proliferation across the northern Southwest. In this presentation, I hope to move in a direction that incorporates the indigenous paradigm of storytelling. I told the story of my education in pottery traditions of the Southwest United States. I told the story of Navajo pottery and also incorporated Navajo stories and thought that structure our world to explain aspects of clan relationships and the design structures of the pots. I hope to convey the story of the physical attributes related to the inner relationships of clay, air, and fire. All these stories had different inner relationships that affect one another and thus incorporate the Navajo concept of ke, which parallels Kehete's native science of interrelationships. I hope that this framing of my research was refreshing and brought some indigenous knowledge to the wider public. And I thank you for your time and listening to my presentation. And we'll take questions now. Oh, one last thing. I just wanted to throw this in there. We gave you some resources for COVID, but I have friends down in San Carlos, and they're fighting for Oak Flat, and it's been in the news recently because they're in court right now, and I think they're trying to limit people's input, but I just wanted to ask for your help to protect Oak Flat. And if you need information, go search up Apache Stronghold and give them some help if you can. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. That was fantastic. Am I coming through okay now?
Yeah.
Okay. We have a bunch of questions. Let's start with some questions about the Dinetah grayware. People were wondering about the pointy bases. What are the pointy bases for? What are they about?
They're cooking vessels, so they can just be put directly in the fire. They're never like they weren't meant to be on a shelf or flat surface. They're meant to be put directly in the coals. So the point sort of, you just push it into the coals.
Okay. And I think this might be a related question. You mentioned woodland pottery, and somebody just asked for a clarification about what.
I think they compared it to woodland pottery because of the applique around the rim, and also a lot of woodland pottery have sort of rounded bottom. They're not flat bottomed.
And that's the pottery from out east, right?
Yeah, I mean it extends onto the plains, so it's conceivable that there could be a relation, but I don't know. It's not proven that it's directly related, or if it's just more of a functional coincidence.
Okay. Somebody asked what kind of food would they cook in those pots?
After they started interactions with Puebloan people, corn, but they could also cook stuff they gathered. I mean, Navajos, their economy was not, they weren't strict agriculturalists. They hunted and gathered also, but they also did grow corn once they got it. And they also started raising domesticated animals once they got them. And they just sort of they'll eat what they can when, their economy, you can't just say they're agriculturalists or they're pastoralists, or, there's even in times of real stress, there's even raiding. And then, times of there's not stress, there's trading. So there's probably a lot of foodstuffs, probably even things we don't think about. Like, for example, Apaches ate a lot of acorns. I've said that we should do more starch analysis on some of these Navajo cooking pots to see, like, I mean, even Puebloan pots. There's not much starch analysis that goes on in the Southwest, and their acorns are a huge food source for some cultures.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Piñons, I don't know.
Mark Varian asked, in your opinion, does the presence of gray ware in Guyana, Taos, and Ute contexts that is similar to Diné gray ware indicate that Diné people could have been in the region earlier than most archaeologists recognize?
I think the Guyana one might, but I think that we'll never really truly know. Of course, we don't, if they did interact, we don't know when that interaction happened. We can't really put a date on it. I've been in contact with Louis Bork, and we've been trying to get together and talk about this. One of the main things would be dating, and then again, there's always doubts that could come in whether they found a sherd or they found a Guyana pot, that was hidden or something, and they copied it. So there's all kinds of. I don't think we'll ever know for sure, but maybe some kind of a technological style analysis. Maybe if you X-ray them and look at coil thicknesses, and I don't know. And so these also sort of resemble pots that go out into the Front Range. There's some older cultures up in Nebraska that they claim are precedents to Apachean, or they say that they are Apachean, but again, no one really knows. And I don't think anyone will ever really know unless we have a time machine.
Yeah, that's what we need. Some questions about the technology. Somebody was asking about the corncob scraping. What stage of the pottery production is that at? Why do they use corn rather than other tools, possibly?
They could have used other tools. Some of those replications, the Netog gray ware replications I did, I used grass. I just used a bunch of grass and just used and I don't know, you'd probably have to do some studies, with the microscope or some kind of, to be able to tell whether, I think a corncob one would be more regular because the kernels are usually regularly spaced, and maybe a grass scraped one would be less regular and more random. But to answer the question, it's after you form the pot and it's not fully dry. They call it not when it's really wet, but as it starts to firm up, that's when you would do it.
Okay.
I think even with what they call leather hard, you could do it then, but that might even be getting.
Do you think it serves
a little too dry?
Sorry. What's that? Do you think it serves a function, or is it decoration? Is it symbolic, maybe?
I think it could serve a function, that it's makes the pot it provides a grip if you're handling it.
Yeah.
But it also may just be a community of practice. And that's another one that we
next week.
I don't know if we'll know.
Somebody asked what materials were used to make the red and yellow paint.
The yellow on the Gobernadors, the yellow is the actual paste, the one they used to. I don't think they're really slipped. There's a lot of previously published work where they say they're slipped yellow, but I don't think they're slipped yellow. It's just the color of the clays. Oh, I should have put a slide in that. So I did take a bunch of a bunch of samples, and I have like a range of, I fired them all to the same temperature. They're fully oxidized. So there is a range, from like buff to yellow to orange. And so the yellow is the clay that the San Jose Formation clays that you find in the cliffs, the mesas in the Neta area, and the black is it's mineral, so it's probably like an iron manganese nodule. That's what most modern pueblos use, and and since they're oxidized, it's probably more manganese because that oxidizes black. Iron, if it's pure iron, it'll oxidize red. So, but most of the nodules you find around in the Southwest are a combination of iron and manganese. And there's different kinds. There's like in Black Mesa in Arizona, where the Hopi Mesas are, there's like a very manganese rich clay stone. So they're not really nodules. They're actually sort of I guess they're layered. They're in layers in the geology.
Yeah.
And it's like I've only found one once up on Black Mesa. If I use those, I usually acquire them from Hopi potters, because they know where to get them. I don't have that knowledge. But I mean, I have found them, and I have tried other kinds of other kinds of rocks. If you just walk around and you see black rocks, they're black because if they're out on the landscape, they're oxidizing black.
Right.
So the thing is, there's different fire and atmospheres. There's like oxygen poor and oxygen rich, and then there's like oxygen poor plus carbon rich. So if it's oxygen poor, you might get a gray color. If it's oxygen rich, you might get the yellow color. And if it's oxygen poor and carbon rich, you'll get black. So that the chemistry of the atmosphere affects the outcome of the color.
Sure. Okay.
So that's how like minerally painted black and whites are black, because they reduce their iron paint and they reduce them so that it turns black. But there's archaeological examples of misfires that get oxidized and the paint goes brown, and I've even seen bright red, where they're trying to make a mineral painted black on white, but
okay,
the paste is actually sort of cream colored, and the white slip is cream colored, and the paint is red.
Yes. All right, we've got some other questions here. James Brooks asked about the ceramic assemblage at Tapacito, which he recalls as the earliest dated pueblito in Dineta. He thought it was 1690-ish. Do you see Gobernador Poly at that site? If not, I know some think it's the only post-revolt Pueblo refugee site, which might help establish a boundary date.
I'm not sure about I don't know the answer to that specifically. It's 1696, but the early boundary date was proven by Lori Reed and by Reed and Reed, and their work. They used C14 dates of like annuals that they found in association with some Gobernador sherds, and that established the earlier date of 1625, 1630. But I'm sorry, I don't know I could probably look and find it in a book I have, but
okay, it's not a quiz. So here's a question from Wade Campbell. How common are Gobernador Polychrome sherds or vessels outside of Dignidad? Have any been found at the colonial Pueblo sites with clan connections like you described?
They're very rare. Dennis Gilpin mentions some in the Ganado area, and me and Kelly Hayes Gilpin pulled those pots in the M&A collection, and we determined that they are not Gobernador Polychrome. One is a Zuni ware, probably a Shiwi polychrome, and the other one is a Paiupki polychrome. The only Gobernador sherd I've ever found, or I mean, in my visits to museums, it's at Museum of Northern Arizona. It's one sherd, and it was found at Cieneguilla, just west of Santa Fe.
Interesting. Okay, I think we need to wind this down, but I did want to ask you, somebody asked if you have a website where you sell your beautiful, beautiful pottery.
Oh, no, I don't.
Okay.
It's really hard to, I haven't had I've been living in California for a decade before I moved back to the Southwest. And then I moved back to California. So it's sort of hard to make them out here. It's easier to make them back in Arizona. There's no place out here I could fire them.
Sure.
So I guess I'm sort of more concentrating on my
doctorate.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, work and my academic work.
All right. Well,
but at some point, I hope to make pottery again.
Yeah.
Regularly.
Great. And then you can come back and tell us about that. Thank you so much, Tim. I think we need to wrap up here, but we really appreciate your really interesting research and just a beautiful slideshow. Thank you so much. And thanks to the audience. And join us next week, same place, same time. Bye, everyone.